Hello and welcome to episode 364 of Uncensored Conservatism. And today I'm going to take a look at, over two parts today and tomorrow, about some thoughts on race relations in the United States. And this could get interesting. But anyway, it's part of my series on things that make me say, what? So let's start with the legacy of slavery. I think we can all admit, sitting here today, that slavery or human bondage is a bad thing. And I get a kick out of people saying that others, like Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, want to ban teaching of slavery in schools. In fact, they just want the issue of slavery put into its historical context. So we can sit here today in 2025 and rail about the evils of slavery. And it is an evil practice. It's still practiced by many cultures around the world. But we're viewing the institution of slavery through the moral lens of 2025. The fact is that slavery existed in this country and was accepted in a large part of the Western world until the 19th century. It's still accepted in some Eastern cultures today, mainly Muslim. I also have to dispute that all slave owners were evil people because it makes no intuitive sense from a business standpoint. If you're going to put out money on a slave to farm your plantation, you're not going to beat him into submission. Okay. There certainly were slave owners who did so, and they should be called out for it, and we should highlight those instances. But again, it didn't exist to the degree the racial propagandists want us to believe. And the whole Project 1619, which was written by Hannah Nicole Jones, who was a journalist, by the way, not a historian, she bases the founding of America not upon the Declaration of Independence from Great Britain or the ratification of the United States Constitution, but upon the first slaves being brought to America. Therefore, she concludes that America was founded on the backs of black African slaves, not the white founding fathers of this country. It's an ugly falsehood that's been disputed by actual historians. A lot of her stuff. And I always get a kick out of those people who decry the Three-Fifths Compromise, for example. The historically illiterate people out there, like Hannah Nicole Jones, who say that our founders viewed black slaves as three-fifths of a white, or 60% of a white person. No, they didn't, except for representational purposes in Congress. Now, prior to the Constitution, there was this thing called the Articles of Confederation. To determine a state's contribution to the common treasury, the richest states were the southern states. But they did not want to contribute according to their total population, and the solution was the Three-Fifths Compromise. They needed money, so they came up with this compromise. That compromise in the Constitution comes directly from the Articles of Confederation, and in fact, the Southern states wanted Negroes counted as a full person when it came to representation to enhance their political power in this new House of Representatives. It was the non-slavery Northern states who said, listen, we have it in the Articles of Confederation, let's just copy it in for representation purposes and for revenue purposes. Let's just copy it into this new Constitution, and that's where your Three-Fifths Compromise comes from. It comes from not from them believing that a black slave was 60% of a white person or something like that. But leaving aside her bullshit, Hannah Nicole Jones is she's simply the epitome of how race relations work in America today. Simply put, it's a victimization mentality. There has to be a victim, and who doesn't want to help a victim of some alleged wrong or injustice or crime? Now, after slavery, there certainly were Jim Crow laws, and which was slavery was eliminated through the 13th Amendment, not the Emancipation Proclamation, as some people contend. And incidentally, those Jim Crow laws, they were enacted by Democrats in the South, not Republicans. And part of the motivation for those laws was the belief that newly freed slaves were simply inferior to whites. But this is not exclusively a Southern sentiment. During the Constitutional Convention, there were certainly anti-slavery advocates from the North. They were against slavery, plain and simple. But one delegate from Pennsylvania, I think it was James Wilson, noted that he'd be damned to approve a constitution that asserted that black slaves were equal to any white person. He couldn't sell that to the white people of Pennsylvania to ratify the Constitution. So racism is saying another race is inferior, but it certainly was not a Southern thing exclusively. I mean, Pennsylvania was one of the most tolerant states, founded by Quakers. And the fact is, there are always going to be racists in the country, And also, racism doesn't apply strictly to white people. There are certainly racist black people in this country who I'll get to a bit given my definition of racism, which I think is the proper definition. The bottom line is that in the musings of people like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Hannah Nicole Jones, despite whatever, it's a constant losing proposition. You can be the most vocal white, non racist in the universe, but you're still going to be racist by virtue of your skin color. I mean, let's look at some statistics where blacks make up 14.4% of the total U.S. population, according to the most latest statistics, yet are convicted of 51% of all murders in this country and 52% of robberies, which are violent crimes. That's a serious disconnect between the population and the problem. And it's like European countries where Muslims make up 4% of the total population but commit 47% of sexual assaults in that country. And just as those disconnects in Europe shine a light on a problem in Muslim culture, so too the disconnects regarding race indicates a problem in American black culture. Now, the civil rights people today will call out institutional racism. That the disconnect is because black people are more likely to be convicted because they're black, despite their evidence or the guilt. Look at incarceration rates. For blacks, it is 600 per 100,000 a population compared to 184 per 100,000 among whites. Again, they'll say it's because a black person is more likely to be jailed than a white, although I don't know of too many white people convicted of homicide who are given probation or a slap on the wrist and a fine for killing anyone. And I do believe it is something in modern black culture these days that lead to these disconnects, not institutional racism or any other such nonsense. Now, Charlie Kirk comments have been mischaracterized by some when they accuse him of being against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Kirk would highlight statistics that showed after World War II and definitely during the 1950s that black home ownership, two parent homes, income, and employment were all steadily increasing within the black community. There were certainly exceptions, but something changed after enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And today we hear about wage and income or academic achievement gaps between blacks and whites. Today, 47% of black, uh, 47% of black mothers are single mothers. Um, there's no husband in the household. Only 15% of white mothers are in single parent households with no husband. So this is one of the bad effects of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and I think that's what he was getting at. Things changed after 1964. We were on this steady incline for blacks, and then all of a sudden, sort of like the war on poverty. There's no fewer people in poverty today or as a percentage of the population than there was when the war on poverty and trillions of dollars later have been expended. So now the Civil Rights Act of 1964 it certainly did some good things, like break down segregation when it came to public accommodations, like restaurants and hotels and things like that. To me, it made no sense that no matter how racist you were, a business owner you were, or that you would turn down money from a black person able to pay the tab at a restaurant or for a night at your motel. It's certainly a bad business model. But what Kirk was getting at, and what I believe is 100%, is that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 codified and instilled a victim mentality collectively on black people. And we can see the results today because when it comes to academic achievement or income, blacks are no better off today than they were in 1963, except they can now patronize a restaurant or motel of their choice, or use the same water fountain or bathroom as a white person. In fact, in all the things that truly count, they've either regressed or remained static. So they trot out these concepts like institutional racism, which are basically excuses for their culture. I get it, and it's easier to blame others for your shortfalls or failures. You're a victim. So explain the scenario to me. A black dude who passes a counterfeit bill with fentanyl in his system dies when being restrained by white police officers. The result is billions of dollars in damages and ruined neighborhoods in the name of the mostly peaceful fentanyl Floyd riots of 2020. Meanwhile, a white conservative activist is assassinated in broad daylight, and there are quiet candlelight vigils in his honor. You know, no riots, no burning neighborhoods, no looting. One time, and maybe they still do, the Washington Post maintained a database of criminal suspects killed by police officers. You have to link to an article to get the details, but two things stuck out to me when I looked at these instances. First, in a vast majority of the cases, the suspect refused a lawful police order, made a threatening gesture, or had a weapon in their hands when they were shot by the cops. The second thing was that about 65% of the victims of police shootings were not black. They were white, Hispanic, some Asian, some Indians. So 35% of the victims of police use of deadly force are black, but 100% of the riots are perpetrated by blacks. Again, there's this disconnect that shows something is off here in black culture today. And I posit it's attributable to the codification of a victimhood mentality. And that, my friends, is your institutional racism. Now, they talk about the disparity in education funding, and one study noted that a school district that is largely minority receives, on average, $2,700 less per pupil than other school districts. Now, first of all, per pupil spending is not a guarantee of academic success. Secondly, schools are primarily funded by local property taxes in the state. So if you lose those local sources because businesses and jobs move out because of crime, or you're burning your neighborhood down because some drug addict dies in Minneapolis, this is to be expected. It's not a racial issue per se, it's what's left over, a low income issue. And with healthcare disparities, I simply tell the black community to heal thyself. Put down the Red Bull and the 2-liter Coke and the family-sized bag of potato chips and eat something healthier. The problems of obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes, and all those things are well documented in the black community, are attributable to a lifestyle choice, bad choices, something indigenous to that culture for whatever reason. And please don't tell me there's an employment discrimination problem in this country today. If anything, we've discarded merit and replaced it with a premium on one's skin tone. So please. And the accusations of voter suppression crack me up the most. I mean, you talk about racism. Is the left seriously suggesting that black people are so unsophisticated and stupid that they cannot obtain a valid ID to vote? They can have a bank account, they can buy a car, they can get a credit card, and have the latest iPhone in their hand, but they can't get an ID. Come on, just knock it off. And this just underscores the hypocrisy or the lack of logic on the left overall, but especially when it involves race relations in this country. I have this view that if you see everything through the lens of race, chances are it is you who is the racist. And it's a no-win situation for white people. You could be the least racist person in the universe. You just don't know you're racist because you lack the proper levels of melanin in your skin. Look at the case of Ta-Nehisi Coates, a racist of the highest order. First, the dude's inarticulate, and I wonder how he ever made it out of a college, but he did. Second, he's a grifter. There's money to be made in beating the drum of racism in America. And think about it. What if the United States was the least racist country on earth? What if there was no slavery? What if there were no Jim Crow laws? What if every black person got in a canoe or a boat and came here voluntarily throughout history? And, it was a big country of kumbaya, blacks and whites holding hands, and everything was peaceful and wonderful. What would Ta-Nehisi Coates' job be? What would he do? So there's money to be made in bad race relations, and they fan the flames of it. And the same is true of Black Lives Matter. Look at Jesse Jackson and his Operation Rainbow crap, or Al Sharpton, who led shakedowns of businesses like Coca-Cola. Hire more black people, contribute to my organization, and we won't boycott Coke products. The list of corporations shaken down by Sharpton is quite lengthy, by the way. Or Ben Crump, that lawyer from Tennessee who seems to become the family lawyer for every black victim of a crime in this country, unless, of course, the killer is black, then he suddenly goes quiet. He just doesn't say too much about black-on-black crime, which is a major problem in the country. Which brings me to another question, that of reparations. What price do we put on the head of every black person in America? I mean, I did the math at $1 million per person. That comes to $52 trillion, money we certainly don't have. And think about this. Not every black person in America can trace their ancestry back to slavery or even the Jim Crow era, pre 19, let's say 65, pre 1965. Does every black person in America get a free registration with Ancestry.com to prove it? And what about black people who arrived in America after slavery and Jim Crow? More recent immigrants, do they get paid too, with no link to slavery? And yeah, what about the black people who find out their ancestors were slaveholders themselves? Do we prorate the reparation? And what about all those dead white Union soldiers who fought to free the slaves? Do their progeny get a cut of the money? Or don't they count because their skin was white? I don't know. Or what about slaves who were voluntarily freed by their masters? Is their payment also prorated? Not only is it expensive, but it's complicated and unworkable, which brings us to with so many variables that it's just never going to be done. So they can talk about it all they want, but it's never going to be done. I'm sorry. They'll reframe reparations as favorable treatment. What is affirmative action but favorable treatment because of the color of your skin or your nationality or the language you speak, or in some cases your genitalia, or what you think is your genitalia now. It's all ludicrous. Which brings me to the so-called experts on racism in America. And I'm talking specifically about the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has nothing to do with the South, has nothing to do with poverty, has very little to do with the law, and about the only thing true about their title is they are a center. I don't even know where they're located. Probably, I think they originated in Alabama or something like that. I guess that's what the Southern is. But anyway, go to their website, try to look up an article. I think you got to get through a paywall now. They want a donation before you can read any of the nonsense that they put out there. But every year they put out something called a hate map, and you can get to that, just put in their hate map and then zero in on something. But it's kind of funny because I live in the Atlantic City, New Jersey area, and every year on their hate map, they have this thing called the AC Skins, which I assume is some neo-Nazi skinhead group. And I can honestly say, I have never read anything locally about this group. There's no hate crime, no literature. I mean, maybe they go out in the woods and they burn a black person in effigy and diss on black people and drink beer and get drunk. That's about, that's a hate group to the Southern Poverty Law Center. But there's certainly no arrests. I haven't heard of any arrests or any violent actions they've taken against black people or anything like that. They also list the libs of TikTok as a hate group. And libs of TikTok simply reposts on other social media screeching leftists who post their own videos out on social media. It started with TikTok, but then they pull from Facebook and X and stuff like that now too. If anything, these largely leftist harpies should be thanking libs of TikTok for getting their message out there to even more people. They include as a hate group Moms for Liberty why? Because these mothers want their kids to learn some basic life skills like how to read, write, and do basic arithmetic, rather than having shit like the LGBTQIA2S to the infinity power ideology shoved down their throats in front of a rainbow flag, or the America is racist country was founded on racist principles bullshit that is put out there as fact. It's now anyone who dares to question trans ideology or opposes the hanging of a rainbow flag or is against illegal immigration, they're now designated a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I mean, shit, they even call traditional Catholics a hate group, which, to the best of my knowledge, a traditional Catholic is somebody who says the Catholic Mass in Latin rather than the vernacular. And I want to know what the fuck exactly is a white Christian nationalist to them. I mean, okay, first of all, I'm white, so I check box 1. I'm Catholic, which makes me a Christian, so I check box 2. And I'm a nationalist in the sense that I believe my government should put my country first. Okay, so, god damn it, I'm a white Christian nationalist. I guess they should come after me now. and I should be on their list. So here's my humble advice to the black community. Stop with the victimhood mentality and heal thyself, okay? It would help if there weren't so many single mother households out there. And it would help if you stopped burning down your own fucking neighborhoods in the name of racial justice. And it would certainly help if you would stop being gullible to the race grifters out there who are taking advantage of you, because they ain't looking out for you collectively or individually. They're looking out for their individual bank account. The leadership, the founders of Black Lives Matter, that should have proven to you. Anyway, those are some thoughts on race relations today in America, and join me again tomorrow for part 2 on this subject. And until then, have a great day and a more pleasant tomorrow.